They make it possible to contact the number of voters we need to contact. So kudos to them. That's a lot of work, and we need them out there consistently. And I think might be the most important, at least to me, is that your volunteer base is likely the next generation of leaders. People who get their first experiences canvassing doors feel empowered. They finally know, get a sense of how they can make a change, take some ownership in who represents them, and it's addictive. And so they keep doing it, and then they become, the next people running for office. So those are 3 really important reasons. So we'll just talk a little bit more. Let's see. So who volunteers and why? I think the answer, oddly, who volunteers and why, the answers are the same. So we'll go through them. Make sure it works. Family and friends who know and love your candidate. Not much different than fundraising. Issue and political activists, especially those who have worked with you or the candidate before. I wouldn't limit it to issues and political activists. If you have worked in the community or with your church or some other group that doesn't seem political at all, those are still the same people who might volunteer with you. People who dislike your opponent, who's surprised, especially in this time. There are some representatives and senators and people out in elected office that I think are really dangerous to our values. It's not just a personal thing. It's I think what they're doing is dangerous to the future of our communities and country. Some endorsing groups. So yeah, if you get the endorsement of a labor union, they have lots of members who can help. Other groups that might have a local base in your town you could think about. Friends of volunteers. Also, if you can read real tiny, it says 5 get 5 model. And it's friend raising. Some people call it forced recruitment, is when you have a volunteer recruit 5 other people. It's hard, it's not easy, and this gets into some organizing lingo or math or common phrase that's, if you need somebody to do something, ask 4 people. 2 of them will say yes, and 1 of them is lying. So you can expect that you'll ask 4 people and only 1 of them will show up. So if somebody's recruiting 5 people, if they get 1 person, that's great. So it's something to think about. Is that the last one? Folks who need a social forum, something to do, some way to get involved, a way to meet other people. And I guess that was it. So how to recruit. This hits another really important principle, is starting to make a list or map of your network. If this is getting hard for you, start backwards. Put yourself in the middle, make a line to a bubble that says Working Families Party, list your friends from Working Families Party. Make a list of other groups you're involved in, family, friends, cousins, anyone that you have in your network, write them down on the piece of paper, make a doodle, and then later you're gonna really wanna put this on a spreadsheet of some type. Who's worked with spreadsheets before? Okay, pretty soon everyone's hand should go up, because this spreadsheets are the best way to manage your volunteer information. You might have everyone's number in your cell phone, but when you pass this off to somebody else to make volunteer calls, you're gonna make sure you're gonna want their information there in a central location. Google Docs, Google Spreadsheets is lifesaver these days, because it's there, it's live, everyone can access it when they need it. And with a spreadsheet, you can always add new columns. So as you're learning about your volunteers, this person's coming next Saturday, you can make a column for every Saturday and check who's coming, and really add it and manipulate it in a way that's just makes your life easier and makes the volunteer manager's life easier.
Hey, Abby,
So, yeah.
Is this list different than your list of donors?
It doesn't have to be. It does not have to be. And in fact, when people give you money, they've made a financial investment, but that's all the more reason you can kind of have that urgency. It's wow, thank you so much for supporting me. That contribution really helped to do X, Y, Z. But what I really need to do is contact voters. Could you give me a couple hours on Saturday? And who's gonna say no because they already, invested.
Not every donor will volunteer and not every volunteer will give, but anybody who's done one should be asked for the other.
Sometimes people don't have the money to give, but will give
Totally.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is the other, the next bullet point here. It says ask repeatedly, personally, specifically, and often. Some people, it might not be I think you probably covered this in fundraising. It might not be the right time then. They might not want to canvas, but if you have a letter folding thing, it's still worth asking them. They might say, I'll fold letters and have a beer or tea or something. So it's important to keep asking people. If you have someone hooked who's already coming, you definitely have to ask them to keep coming. You could get people on a regular schedule, in fact. And yeah, it's just valuable to ask. Personally, that's important. That does not really mean an email. That doesn't, I mean, a text message could do if you're really close to somebody, but either face-to-face or on the phone is gonna get somebody there. Specifically, yeah, if I asked you like, hey, can you volunteer sometime? You're probably gonna, but if I say, hey, we're having our volunteer kickoff on Saturday the 20th, it starts at 10, can you make it? And you can get the answer right there. Yeah, and so if you do have people there on Saturday the 20th, before anyone leaves, you want to say, hey, when are you coming back? Reshifting. So making sure, like, when you have that person in front of you, you are nailing down that time that they are coming back to help. So that's really important. And it's just make a confirmation the night before or 2 days before, because if I ask and you say yes, and then I don't call you, well, you might not feel guilty about skipping out. So like if I call you the night before, you're like, oh, Abby's really counting on me, I'm not gonna let her down, I'm gonna show up. So that part is critical and really important.
And often means really often. If somebody is like on your list of volunteers, if they're like a friend of your candidates and you expect them to be helpful on the campaign, you know, maybe not right now because it's still winter, but come spring, they should get a call from someone on your campaign, either a volunteer recruiter, another volunteer, the candidate, every week asking them to volunteer.
So you have volunteers. Now what? You definitely don't want to send them out in the world like George Michael Bluth here from Arrested Development. You don't want them moping around, feeling no purpose. What we're looking to do, if you'll indulge my animation, is build a sense of ownership, a real sense of team, building a culture where people feel really invested. And I'd say a good way to maximize your time or as a volunteer coordinator is to get a lot of people to come at the same time. If everybody comes at 10 o'clock, we can get five people together, trained up at once, talking with each other, and that sense of team starts to grow. And here, the GIF didn't work, but it's supposed to be the kid president giving high fives. So yeah, this part is so important to adequately onboard and train your volunteers. They are the face of your campaign. They are the ones directly talking to the voters who didn't answer the door when the candidate came around, right? So it's really important that they know why they're volunteering or why they support the candidate, what the message is, how to ask directly, all the things that we're going to cover in the next section. One thing I like to do with volunteers is, of course, I give people the script, but we've all had scripts and felt really stiff about reading the script. You have to learn the principles, and with that comes practice, but I think one thing that every volunteer can do the minute they walk in the door is say why they're supporting that candidate. So I said, think for a minute about why you support Abby. I'm like, oh, because she trained me at this awesome training, and so I wanna do well by her. That's probably not the good answer, but like you have something personal, and when you're talking to a voter just out of the blue, that makes all the difference. Yeah, so you'll always want to give somebody a chance to practice if you give them a script. So we call it role play. So we'll like go through, give them a chance to get used to the wording and the ask and the call for commitment, and it gets easier. So yeah, I have this. For someone who hasn't canvassed before, sometimes partnering people up is a great idea. You have to be mindful of your resources though. So like send them out with somebody the first time so they can get a sense of it, but then they can take their own sheets. Sometimes you can actually do sheets that are even and odd, so people can be on the same street at the same time, but not together, and that way you're maximizing the number of doors you'll hit, but people are feeling more comfortable and confident because they're not alone. Oh, and I love this part too. Always leave time to debrief with your volunteers. You want to hear how it went. You want to know what was challenging. Like, and you hearing them is so important. It builds that team feeling that, well, they really cared about what I did today and how it went, and so I'm gonna come back and do more, hopefully. And once in a while, you'll hear something that's not like, maybe a little alarming. You're like, wow, I really want to look into this. I know at one point, I was phone banking, and a voter said, oh, well, I got a notice in the mail that said election day was on Wednesday, and maybe they're trying to do some, messing with our campaign and getting people to turn out on the wrong day. Well, like, if I hadn't asked that volunteer voter how things were going, we wouldn't have heard that, and we were able to debunk it right away. But just so you know, the debrief is critical. Give them meaningful work. There's so much work to do on a campaign, and people are giving up their weekends and weeknights to help you, so you have to make sure that you use their time well, that people aren't standing around waiting for you. So this means getting prepared the night before sometimes. I think also having like a list somewhere or even a file of little offhand jobs that people can do really helps you. If a staff person ever thinks like, this is really important, but I don't have the time to do it, that's when this file comes in, and you can give it to people as they come in. Meaningful. This is explain the context of what you're asking your volunteers to do and how it helps the campaign reach its goals. Sometimes people, especially when they're volunteering, they like want to know what they wouldn't find out in the news. They like want to know the word on the street and like, I don't know, the gossip, and it makes them feel a part of something. It gives them skin in the game, but they're also recognizing the big picture. Like, I'm not just gonna give you some doors because it's nice outside, get some exercise. Like, it's real. Like, let's try to get 5 contacts out of this, and it keeps people motivated and coming back. And the other thing about the meaningful, like, let's talk about meaningful work. Like, is shredding old canvas sheets meaningful work? Not really. It's like everybody who's on the campaign should be doing direct voter contact as much as possible. Like, you might have people who have extra time to, like, I don't know, write the envelope, like write addresses on envelopes or something like that, but like as much as you can use volunteers to knock on doors, it's really, really important. Or make phone calls. Lead by example. I love this one. Like, how motivated are you when you have a boss that like won't do what you're doing? They'll be like, yeah, you do this, I'm gonna go do something else and wish you luck. It's like, yeah, leading that example is really important. It sets a tone for a campaign, and people can aspire to be like you if you're modeling good behavior when you're like talking to people and etc. And then the leadership ladder. Yeah, so people should come up the ladder if they're coming frequently. I mean, this usually comes down to people with time on their hands, which is hard to come by but like as a lot of students and retired people, like they can often take on more, and we want to make sure that like we can say they've met check the first box criteria, like level of entry, and then they've made it to the next level of entry, like whatever bigger responsibility, which might be calling other volunteers, it might be doing the training and sending people out on the doors. Making a list of the activities is really helpful. Oh, I think I went back, by the way. Respect them. Yes, I said this. Like, people are giving up their time for you, so it's really critical. Make it fun. Yeah, you gotta make it fun. Have some drinks after, maybe, just a tiny bit of chit-chatting afterwards. These are relationships with real people, so let's act like decent humans. Feed them. I also think this is really important. A hungry volunteer is an unhappy volunteer. If you're taking the time to come knock doors out in the afternoon, you're not home making dinner, you're not going to the grocery store, like you're gonna need some food for people. Then there are the volunteers who I love to bake, but I don't like knocking doors, and give them something to do. They can bake and keep everyone fed. Not a big deal in the spring, but when it is 90 degrees in August and you have people canvassing, always send people out with a water bottle, your phone number in case things get hot and they need to get picked up or something like that. Sunscreen is one that's really helpful in the summer because people don't think of it until they're outside for 5 hours. And then thank them. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's so important to thank people. Even the smallest action they're doing for you is really important to you and them. So don't miss that part. One thing I really love to do at the end of a campaign and on election day is any volunteer I come into contact with, I'm like, well, so you know where the celebration is tonight, right? So they're invited to the party. I don't know, sometimes I don't even know these people, but I'm like, you know where the party is, right? Because they've spent some time with us. They should spend time with us to see the vote results come in. And it's a big thank you. And some people will do a thank you event separately, but most read. How to lose a volunteer. Okay, so yeah, no fun, no love, no growth, nothing to do, tension or conflict. I think we can avoid all these things, is that right? Yeah, we can like have some fun and show some love and respect for people. So it's not that hard. Like recruiting volunteer is like keeping a good database and tracking people and having a good coordinator or people who are calling and making sure that like when people arrive, they're put to good use and you have like a plan for them. So we can avoid these things, we'll be in good shape. All right, and so next I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of a campaign, staff and organization-wise. So there's a couple models. They look like fireworks. This is more of a traditional model of organizing. Love these animations. Really wanted the fireworks for you guys. And this is the snowflake model. Quick, who saw a difference? Okay. Take a stab, someone. Donna, Mel, Jamie. Yeah. So in this like traditional model, you have like the organizer or volunteer coordinator in the middle, and they're doing all the talking. Wow, that gets old really fast. That's really hard. One person is sustaining the workload of what could be several people. So seriously, make a doodle if it helps you think about how you'll organize your campaign or your people, and do this just so you can think about how people share the load and how their roles work together. When you have a snowflake model, you're maximizing everybody's ability and capacity to take on more work and to build more leaders and leadership. So really something to consider.
Networking.
Yeah, it's networking. So roles and responsibility. The candidate. We've probably done a huge amount of talking about what the candidate should do. The candidate's really the front-facing person. They're the person in public. They're knocking as many doors as they can. They're following up with as many undecided voters as they can. Depending on the size of the race, you might have like earned media where you're talking to press, but like the candidate needs to worry about being the public face. I also feel like the candidate needs to have some magnanimity. Sometimes like if no one on the campaign is going to volunteer and work harder than the candidate, and so that candidate really needs to like bring the energy and be that central person. The campaign manager. So if you did have earned media or press, the campaign manager would be the person preparing you and running your schedule. The campaign manager makes sure all the trains run on time and that other people are doing their jobs and checking in periodically to make sure things are where they should be, like their field numbers, volunteer numbers, fundraising. So very critical that you find a good campaign manager that can help you with that. And campaign managers sometimes are volunteers, so important to note. The volunteer coordinator, maybe I'm biased. I feel like the volunteer coordinator is so important. They're the ones that keep all of the relationships with all of your volunteers and like keep in close contact with them and keep them coming back. That person just being good and organized and being friendly and able to make lots and lots of phone calls. It's important. And then the kitchen cabinet. Has this word come up yet? Kitchen cabinet?
Not here.
Oh, okay. All right. So kitchen cabinet is a group of people usually close to the candidate or who are active in the community in some way that have valuable insight to add. The kitchen cabinet, you can kind of think of them as like the volunteer staff. You should be meeting with your kitchen cabinet. Some people meet like bi-weekly to check in, and that's like if you hear some weird news from the doors, like you want to talk to your kitchen cabinet about what's going on, but you also want to make sure that they're like working and like staff people. They're not your like high-level advisors that are just going to say, oh, we should do this, we should do that. It's like if they're saying that, then they should do it. So it's important to have like the members of your kitchen cabinet to be like a sounding board, maybe to help with your message, but also be working on things. Is that clear?
Yeah. How do you develop that?
I think, so when you're making your list of volunteers, you might want to think who do you have strong relationships with, but who would also be valuable to you. So like it's not just yes people or people you see a lot at cocktail hours or something like that, but like people who you're like, oh, they do things in the community, they know people in the community, they're on my side, and they can add value. So,
It's also a good sort of top of the leadership ladder.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the biggest danger for the kitchen cabinet is like you get a bunch of like armchair quarterbacks on it, and then you're spending a lot of time talking to people who aren't doing anything. It should really function like a staff meeting, right? It's the people who are doing the most and taking the most leadership on your campaign.
So is there like overlap with the volunteer coordinator and the campaign manager?
Yeah, those two people are definitely part of the, and in fact, the kitchen cabinet should be run by the campaign manager, not by the candidate. And as you get closer to the election, probably gonna have kitchen cabinet meetings with the candidates even at, because they're out knocking on doors.
when does somebody get an official role or title? When they've done the work to prove they are capable and accountable. It is so hard to take a title away if there's a problem. So that's really important. Yeah, building people up that ladder, and when they're ready, if it makes sense for them to have an official name or role, go for it. Here are some other examples. Field manager. In a lot of cases, your volunteer coordinator might act as the field manager. Just making sure people have the packets and the turf that you're going out to knock is getting knocked. We'll talk a lot about that later. Finance director, maybe the treasurer. Like if you have the capacity and people are going up that leadership ladder, they can be precinct or neighborhood captains. So they take ownership of their neighborhood and like get people out there and jazz. Canvas or phone bank or letter writing captains. The volunteer coordinator or manager is going to have a lot in their hands. So if you can say like, I will staff a phone bank, or like I can staff the letter writing campaign and sit there for 4 hours while you do something else, like that's really important and helpful. Website and data manager. If you have the luxury to have someone who can do these things, like it's a role that can happen. Researcher and calendar manager. So yeah, if there are events coming up on the calendar, you don't want the candidate scrolling the internet or Facebook looking for these things. If somebody's like sole purpose is to find these roles, these events for you, that's really helpful. Also researcher, like what's going on out there? What are the opponents up to? It's helpful to have somebody on that so that the candidate can focus on being the candidate and the manager can manage them. And I just wrote this kind of cheekily, chief thank you note writer. Yeah, those thank you notes are really important and go a long, long way. So it's helpful.
Can you just go back just for a
Are we gonna get?
Yeah, we're gonna
We'll
send them
send you the
out.
slides.
So
Oh, okay.
forget it. Yeah. Who does what? Well, that's up for the candidate, the campaign manager, well, mostly the campaign manager and the group of volunteers to really decide based on the size and scope of your campaign. That first slide I showed you had 4 roles on it. That second one had a lot more, so you'll really have to see what makes sense for you and what you guys can handle. It's really, really important to write down the roles, like outline them, write them down, especially as more and more roles come up. It needs to be clear that there's a chain of command and that people know what they're responsible for, and there's no meetings where you're like, well, I thought someone else was doing it. So, Terry?
Is it too soon? Is there a timeline of when you should be doing that? Like if you ask people to sign up for those roles now, but this doesn't really roll in until maybe April, May, June?
You have that bar where you want to make sure people are going to do the thing you assign them
Right.
first. So if you did have somebody in mind, say for like the events thing, you could ask them now, like, hey, would you mind putting together an events calendar for me? And if they do it, then when it becomes more important, you can ask like, would you take this on?
I would say right now you should assign people tasks.
Yeah.
And if they do them well and like take responsibility, then you can make them responsible for all the tasks of that type, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of time, assign people tasks and like don't make somebody the like canvas captain now before you've had an opportunity to figure out if they even like canvassing, right? Like if you're not gonna start canvassing until March,
Right.
you don't decide now who your canvas captain is gonna be. You ask somebody to like recruit volunteers for something, and if they're good at that, then maybe they're good at recruiting canvassers too. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yes.
And like I just just said, it's really important to write this down so the expectations are clear and measures can be taken, which sounds pretty harsh, but like I said, yeah, you don't want to give the title away before the work's been done. So, yeah, the most important thing though, absolutely everyone should spend time on direct voter contact. If you're the volunteer coordinator and you got people coming at 10, well, by 11, you can go out and knock on the doors and maybe come back a half hour earlier to meet them when they're done. As much as we can we've talked about this all weekend, voter contact is really the game. The voters decide who wins, so it's really critical. And that's all. So
I want to say one other
Yeah.
thing. So most of volunteer recruitment can and should be done by somebody who isn't the candidate, right? You want somebody friendly, somebody persistent, somebody who can call that list of people and say, okay, it's Tuesday, we need some people on Saturday, you coming in? But you can't come on Saturday, how about Sunday? We can do it on Sunday. So, upbeat, persuasive, personable, and willing to do those calls every week. But remember who we're calling to be volunteers. They are often the candidates' friends and family. So running a campaign basically means you're sort of turning over those relationships to somebody else to recruit those folks. So you want to do that well. But also if the volunteer recruiter coordinator is running into a block, having a hard time recruiting volunteers, or it's getting near the end of the campaign and you really need everybody, even those people who've not been doing anything so far, to show up for election day, then it's not nuts to have the candidate call through those people and ask them to volunteer. And it's good to think about ways for the candidate to sort of personally thank volunteers along the way, even though they probably shouldn't be doing most of the volunteer recruitment and management. And you don't want your volunteers actually going to the candidate and being what do you want me to do? Right? You want them going to somebody else to ask those questions. But the thanking and then occasionally the sort of asking and getting people reinvested, that can be the candidate. Does that make sense? Mark?
Yeah, I want to ask some campaign manager questions.
Sure.
I've been offered to do a campaign manager, so I think I'm okay, but I think it's hard for people to wrap their head around who's the right type of person to be a campaign manager. And I've had a lot of different feedback about that in terms of people who have run campaigns before, or ran the field part of a campaign before, or is just a really smart, really well organized person. Talking to Congressman Cicilline, Chris Pizzacco was his mayoral campaign manager, and he was just brown, stupid the whole time. So, just curious as to your own perspectives on that.
Want to take that or want me to? Look, I managed my first campaign. I managed a $250,000 campaign when I was 21. There were 300 volunteers. I had 4 staff people. Nobody in their right mind would have given me that level of responsibility in any other sector in the world. There is no formal requirement to be a campaign manager. You need somebody who understands this stuff, who is on board with the same strategy that you are, who's willing to work their little tail off, and who's persistent and organized and all of those things. You also need somebody who will tell you the truth when you have dumb ideas, as happens, and who you are willing to take that from. I sometimes when I do a training that's more of a campaign manager training, I spend some time talking about these weird boss dynamics that you have on a campaign, right? Because the candidate can fire the campaign manager, right? And the final sort of say about what is okay and not okay on the campaign is the candidate's. But on a day-to-day basis, the campaign manager is going to tell the candidate where to go and what to do. So I think if you're a candidate and you're hiring a campaign manager, you want someone who's organized, you want someone who's going to work hard, you want someone who you trust to run the mechanics of the campaign, and you also want someone who you are personally willing to have tell you what to do. And when you're freaking out about something that you need to take a deep breath about, and when you need to go home and take a nap, this is, it's quite personal. So yeah. One rule role we did, if we have a minute, like one role we did talk about on the campaign is candidate partner or spouse. What's the best job for a candidate's partner or spouse?
It depends on making food, doing laundry.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so that's real. Like, if you're running for office, you're probably like a less useful in your home life than you were before. So whoever your partner or spouse is probably doing more dishes than they were doing before, and that you probably have to make that real for people. So
Supportive.
yeah, So I would say actually, candidate partner is like the hardest job on a campaign.
Why?
Because being a candidate is inherently kind of like crazy making and like very anxiety producing, but you're out there every day, you're like talking to voters, and so you're getting like a lot of positive reinforcement. If you're the candidate's spouse, you're probably at least as freaked out about it, right? Maybe more, because it's even harder for you to imagine why anybody would be critical of this person you love. But you maybe don't have that kind of positive reinforcement where you're like talking to voters a lot. So I would say really important to put the candidate's spouse. So candidate spouse probably not actually in a position to make really good strategic decisions because of a very good thing, right? Like love is not the same as strategy. And if they're a good partner, then love is gonna trump it every time, right? Like, okay, so they may not be the best strategic thinkers on the campaign. They can be really, really valuable and helpful in a lot of ways. And I think if you're the campaign team or if you're helping out, try to put the candidate's spouse in a position where they are getting the same kind of positive reinforcement that the candidate is. So like where they're talking to supporters, where they're like seeing how many people are volunteering, where they're getting voters who are like, oh yeah, totally, I'm voting for her, right? Like, candidate spouse should knock on a lot of doors, if you can. They're actually great to have put up lawn signs too, because also they're usually the most freaked out about the lawn signs.
What about parents?
Same thing. Same thing. Yeah. You want to put them in a position where they're talking to a lot of people who are like, I love Jamie. I'm definitely voting for her. She's been a great city councilor, right?
Well, what do you do when they're not great at communicating?
Ask them to ask their friends for money.
Okay.
Or put up lawn signs. I mean, somebody has to do that, right? Like it's it's a good thing for somebody, and it feels really good to do because you're like, look, now there's more lawn signs out there. It feels really good.
My favorite thing for a spouse to do is what Linda's husband did, which is run for the same town council.
Oh yeah, sure. Sure.
Not the same seat. Yeah. There were 2 seats.
Yeah, you could do that too.
I also think it's very important for a candidate's spouse on how they respond to things.
Uh-huh.
Because media is around all the time, you're having different conversations with people, so it becomes really personal. And being that person's spouse, you can kind of take things to heart and
Yeah.
forget that it's a campaign.
Yeah, candidate spouse should never talk to the press.
Yes. Well, people in general too, because people
Yeah.
get upset. They're like, you're talking about my
Yeah.
wife, or my
Yeah.
husband. So that's very important.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if you're the campaign team, like have some respect for what a hard position that is on the campaign. Like I think harder than candidate.
Yeah, spouses and family should definitely not be members of the kitchen cabinet. That would be a problem from the get-go, so.
But they're often great door knockers.
Yeah.
People love to be like, oh man, you're her husband? Like, oh my god, you're her mom? Like,
Yeah.
that seems special to them.
So the only thing I didn't cover in the slides that I think is really important is like having a location where volunteers regularly meet, so they like know where to go to pick up their turf. They know who's going to be there. They know there's food or water or a bathroom if they need it. Sometimes it's the candidate's house and that's fine. Sometimes you might have a friend or supporter that can say, hey, you can use my living room, but you'll collect a lot of materials, like a lot of walk packs and canvas sheets and clipboards, and like you'll want to have like sticky notes on the wall where people can read the latest numbers of how many doors you've knocked or conversations you've had or how many IDs you've made, things like that. So I think the space somewhere warm and welcoming where people can come in, drop by, get what they need and go is really important. So think about who you could ask for that, or if you could open up your own house. This is mostly for like smaller local races. If you're running a big race, you're going to fundraise enough to have an office space somewhere in town. So
Maybe like different places depending on the day.
I I would maybe try to keep it down to like 1 or 2 spots. Yeah, it wouldn't, yeah, it would maybe get confusing. I think you can, I've had relationships with volunteers where I'd say, listen, I'll drop the pack off at your house while I'm driving by, or like while I'm doing my own walk pack, but like that's comes after I know that they're gonna do it, after I really trust them, and only because like we talk a lot and I know their schedule, that kind of thing. So can accommodate people.
People like to have a place to come together, and it shouldn't be the candidate's house if you can avoid it, because it's hard to be a candidate, and or if you like have a maybe if you have like a basement space that's separate or something like that. It is nice if you're a candidate to like have a place where you can get away from it. Now you're probably running your campaign out of your house right now, but like once we get to like April and like you really have volunteers coming through all the time and going out and knocking on doors, it would be good to have moved on to a different spot by then.
If they have an office, is that appropriate?
Sure.
Or should they keep it separate?
As long as it's, yeah, I think that's appropriate. I think it depends a little bit on what the like legal structure of the business is and the campaign finance rules, but we can talk about that. Yeah.
And it probably should be someplace close to the district, that's not further in.
Right.
When
Yeah.
they're
Out of the district.
Convenient
Yeah.
for volunteers.